Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's Fireside Chat coming live from the COVIDMD screening here at the Southside Church of Christ in South Los Angeles, California. Right now, we're testing about 200 people today. We're giving away food, we're giving away shoes. We appreciate the City Council, Los Angeles City Council, specifically Marquise Harris Dawson, who is sponsoring this event, along with Miss Oprah Winfrey, who's sponsoring us with food today for our participants. And we thank, again, the city for bringing New Balance shoes. And we're just doing a lot today to make sure that our community knows that we here at the Southside Church of Christ care for you. We're here for you. We're trying to make sure that not only that you have your spiritual health, but your physical health in these times of need. And then the other piece that we're going to talk about today is our mental health. And I really think social justice has a lot to do with mental health, physical health also, and spiritual health also. But today we're going to talk a lot about the mental side of what's going on in our communities. And with that, we have a great esteemed panel. We're going to go right into introducing our panel. And again, I'd start with myself. My name's Chris Backus. I'm not only a preacher's kid, and my father's the preacher here, Southside Church of Christ for 64 years, but I'm also the executive director of our nonprofit Concerned Citizens Community Involvement, where we do health, education, and well-being as our mission. And our mission is to serve not only South LA, but throughout the world, people in those three areas. I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we have going on to support people as a going concern in our community. I'd like to next introduce Naima. Naima is the co-founder of Story Inside You, which is a platform that empowers Black women and young queens and to find their freedom in her story. And her goal is to elevate her mind and health and embrace her divine truth when working with young queens. Okay. She's a person that has 12 years experience as an organizational development and social impact expert, and serves as the director of human resources and operations as a member of the East Los Angeles Community Corporation's executive team. She's certified in restorative justice and meditation practices, which is what we all need right about now. And she's done a lot of organizational work that prevents inequality and hostility in organizations as we deal with this new normal. We'd like to welcome you, Naima, to the conversation. Next, we have Dr. Turner.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chris.
All right, thank you. Dr. Michelle Turner. She's recently published a great book that's really transformative and kind of on point with what we'll be talking about today. But last year, she released a book, which I have read, which is a wonderful book. So I appreciate you penning the book. Affirmed is the name of the book, Life Lessons in Racial Healing and Transformation. She offers a unique experience in the 21st century around race, heritage, identity, leadership in a manner that provokes, a really good reflection and healing conversation. And really the book really is there to improve social environments and relationships. It's available on Amazon, y'all, so go pick it up or at ShellyTurner.com. Her professional background has one to do that's near and dear to my heart. She serves as my executive director and president of the USC Alumni Association since 2007, of which I am a member and also a proud alumni of USC. In that, we've raised a total over $10 million in scholarships and awards since the time she started. Huge accomplishment. Not only that, she works in the healthcare field, 25 years as a general manager of a privately held corporation that deals with radiology consulting services for diagnostics, imaging centers, and hospitals. Thank you, Dr. Turner, for joining the conversation.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And finally, we have Dr. Carlos McGee. Dr. McGee is also an author, and it's an amazing journey she's been on. I can remember her first book that she wrote and going to her book signing. I think that was at McDonald's back in the day in Ladera. And since then, she's written 7 children's books that are filling school districts with the books that feature, of course, a multicultural literature for children, multicultural literature for children. She believes in the cultural literacy will be the medium for the global community in the 21st century, where the changing demographic within our various communities will uniquely need to require a multicultural pedagogy. How more relevant in this conversation is that? We will talk a lot about that today. And she was also the director of the United Negro College Fund for 12 years, where she received the first President's Award for raising over 130% over the annual goal of her annual goal. And she produced that famous event with Magic Johnson, Midsummer's Night Magic, we used to have at the Forum. Spent many years helping get that event together. She's also been involved with various colleges, universities here in South LA and school districts. She brings a cadre of experience through the ESL experience that she's had in the past. And we like to thank Dr. Carlish, first of all, for the sacrifice that you've made over the last 30 some odd years in advancing Black education. And we just really are proud of what you've done, and we're looking forward to the next 30 years of work, as I wink. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Carlish McGee.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Our conversation is about social justice, but we're framing this around conversations that lead to action. What's next? And so as we look at, obviously, all the things that have gone on in our community in the last few weeks, few months, and obviously over the last decades, centuries, the conversation has to move from that, just a conversation, to action. And so some of the things I want to kind of have you guys express in your different spheres is, first of all, give us your impression of this so-called new justice movement that we are seeing take place in our communities. The first question I have to that, is it new, and how do we make it stick this time around? Let's start with Dr. Turner, then we'll go to Naima, then we'll go to Dr. McGee.
Thank you, Chris. So your question, the last question is it new, and how do we make it stick? And, I think for a lot of us who are on this broadcast, who are of a certain age, we can certainly remember efforts very similar to this that we grew up in. And, so to that end, I would say that the era of protest is not new. It's something that's actually very ingrained in our DNA as Black people, because we've always grown up in every capacity of our society knowing that our struggle was not finished, but then there's the question of struggle for what. So when I grew up, the emphasis was very much on the struggle for power, for representation, and so my generation basically filled those seats. You saw us, enter into the business fields and many other professions where we were not, to basically check the box in terms of representing Black excellence and professionalism and thought leadership. But I think today's struggle, and certainly a lot of what I see on the campus where I am, is that while that may not be the fight, the issue is still about, a recognition and a respect for basic humanity. And in my mind, that continues the struggle for what in terms of equality, even though a lot of people right now are using the word equity. I think, we know that we have not gotten where we need to be in terms of how people respect us, the change of hearts and minds in terms of, knowing what I bring when I come into a room, that we truly are equal in the eyes of God and our walks on this earth. So it's not a new struggle, but it has had different arcs. And I think we are finally at that place where we really have to answer this question about our shared humanity. And that's the moment that we're in.
Yes. Naima?
Powerful. I absolutely agree with Dr. Turner as well. We are in a place of a reckoning of deciding, are we going to live into humanity? And not just say it, but to believe it. And I feel like we're in a place in reference to like new justice, right? Of, are we going to be seen? are we going to be acknowledged? And is our voice going to be heard? And then the next step is not just in society, because one of the things I focus on is in the workplace. Because you know what? Too often we have a seat at the table, but are we heard at that table? So I feel like in this new justice, it's an effort. It's honestly like a reckoning and rebirth of newness in every level of how we are being in this world. So that's my piece on that. Is it's how are we going to show up as human beings? How are we going to live into what we define as humanity? And how are we going to make that change from the inside out?
All right, appreciate that. Dr. McGee,
Yeah.
go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Michelle and Naima. I'm so happy to be on this Zoom with both of you. I guess my take on a new social justice, I don't think anything is new to Black people, African Americans. I just don't. I think we've been doing this for so long until every 10 years we want to put a new spin on it. I think what's happening in this particular time is that we've taken all the energy and all the abuse that we've endured for so long, and now we're hearing a new voice. That's what's new to me. We're now seeing young people out there that really did not have a clue about the struggles that we endured for the last 401 year. So what I'm seeing now is just a new voice. Our young people are standing up, they are speaking out, and they are saying what we've been saying, but only today as a collective. Enough is enough. As Naima alluded to, yes, we've had a seat at the table, but have we been heard? These young people are not only sitting down, they're standing up and they're making their voices heard, and they're taking the proactive agenda. They're getting on boards. They're looking at legislation, and they are defining it by what we can do in this particular time with our legal system, our so-called justice system. And so I just see that we have a new generation. We don't have a new justice system, in my opinion.
That's great. And that kind of leads me into my mind when I form this next question of, yeah, okay, we've got everybody on board now. We're marching towards something, right? We're marching towards hopefully an agenda that we are setting, have a seat at that table to set. But how do we measure success in this new agenda or an agenda that we are hopefully are part of? What are the signs we should look for? What are the data points that we should look at to say, yes, you know, this time in 5 years, hopefully we will be here on this metric, right? And I really want to hear what you all think in your different spaces where we can start measuring success. Let's start with Dr. Turner. Where can we measure success?
So in a lot of the work that we're doing, actually campus-wide now, it mirrors a lot of work that's being done in higher education across the spectrum of many universities, many corporations. And when I mean the work is, you know, under this umbrella of the new catch umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I have to do a little timeout on this because most approaches into this work, you know, are with respect to incremental conversations, incremental measurements. You know, how do we improve? How do we set goals? But the question is never asked, and this is the one that I push, you know, what should the world look like? You know, if we arrived on Mars, what should Mars look like? Because that's what it's going to feel like to Black people. We are going to be in a world, if we get what we need in terms of it, the multi-layered pieces of equality that feel like home to us, it's going to be a new world. So what is Mars really going to look like? And how do we set an agenda for what that world should look like, and then work backwards. Because it's not going to be enough to do bias training so that people can check a box and say, oh, I went to that class. You know, it's not going to be enough to set goals about percentage improvement. You know, Chris, one of the things we talk about a lot is percentage improvement in Black enrollment at the university where I am. But that's just an incremental piece of the conversation. What is the world going to look like when we don't have to count anymore? You know, and why aren't we thinking really that big? Because I think in this conversation about social justice, we need to stretch people to think as big as they possibly can. Because at the end of the day, we need them to change how they feel and their attitudes and their belief systems somewhat, you know, not just have it be about measurements. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's basically how I think about this, because I'm not in too many rooms where people are really saying, well, if we were to fund, for instance, we deal with scholarships, how much money would it take to create a fund for social justice here at USC, to fund every Black student that would need it to gain an equitable experience? How much money would that be?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Right. That's a good point. Good point. Dr. McGee, in the spaces you operate, you know, I'm sure y'all are having these conversations at the highest levels in the spaces you operate in these school districts. Talk to us about it.
I'd like for you to repeat the question again so that I.
Yeah, how do we measure success in this movement, in this agenda? What are the signs that we're moving towards a successful outcome, or are there data points that we should be looking for to look for a successful movement in our agenda, social justice agenda, specifically for us? When I say us, I'm talking about Black people right now.
That's a difficult one. I think we would have to kind of put certain things in pockets and then measure it from there. You know, as a school board member for Inglewood Unified School District, when I look at the achievement gap and the lack thereof when it comes to our African American students, I could very easily say that, you know, if each of our students start getting the education and the attention that they need, you know, that would be an improvement. So for me, because I am involved in that arena, that's one of the measurements that I'm looking for. How do we get there? That's a whole nother story. Because as Michelle just mentioned, you could give all of the Black students at SC the financial wherewithal that they need to get through that academic institution. But what will they look like coming out? So it's not only a measurement of money, but it's also a measurement of systemic racism that is all too prevalent in these academic institutions. So do we get more African American professors? Do we get more African American studies? All of that, to me, has to be included somewhere in the equation so that we're able at some point to measure the outcome. Yeah. But we already know that there are areas that we have such gaps in. It's not just the achievement gap, we just gapped out all over. So I think when we start looking at those gaps and those voids that need to be filled, we can start looking at what that outcome is going to look like. I can say, you know, just based on what you're doing today, that Marquise, a young councilman in your councilmatic district, had you had a white councilman, would he even care to come to your church and do COVID testing? Right. So that to me is an achievement. Not only do you have a Black councilman, but you have someone who obviously cares about getting our community tested. And so when I look at that as a measurement, that's progress to me. And even if it's baby steps. I'll take it.
Yes.
So that's, fill some of the voids, and we can count our achievements.
That's wonderful. Naima?
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree with what Dr. McGee said. We got gaps everywhere. So it's like, where do we even begin in all the gaps that need to be filled? I mean, we can start with writing our own story, right? Making sure that our story is in the books that our kids read when they're learning about the history of America. I mean, that's a big gap right there. In the space that I'm in reference to the corporate space and nonprofits, the gap that I want to see is I want to see the game change. I want to see the accountability from these leaders in companies to actually back up what they say that they're doing in their BLM statement. That's the gap. That's what I want to see. I want to see the work being done that's not just on an intrapersonal level, but an interpersonal level, because I am over hearing the word, well, what do I do? Because it's not about what it is you necessarily do. It's about who are you being? Yes. Who are you deciding to become? Mm-hmm. Because when you decide to change it from the inside out, to decide, I am not going to tolerate behavior that is racist. I'm not going to tolerate behavior that does not align with my values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we can talk about some change. Mm-hmm. So that's what I want to see from these organizations, from these companies, from leaders, not just, as Dr. Turner said, doing a DEI training and saying, I checked the box and we're done, but literally taking the time to say, you know what, we're going to go through a series and we're going to make a commitment. And this commitment is going to be for a year, because what do we know is that change takes time. Yeah. And we're going to focus on wellness, because that's a big piece of this picture too, is that we can't just look at the person, but not look at the whole person. We have to look at how we're taking care of them too. And what kind of culture are we creating in that organizational environment that says, I care for you. You're not just a number, but I care for your whole being. So that's just a start in the changes that I want to see.
And you brought up another point, and I'm going to skip around kind of with some of the questions, because your point, and you, a couple of you already said this, humanity, being treated as humans. Mm-hmm. And then as we step in these spaces and not being treated that way, the psychosis of that and the upheaval in our personal well-being around that, right? And, we always talk about in our community code switching, right? And how we have to present ourselves one way in one space when we go to work or in some of these environments. Right. How do you present yourself in a whole different way? But the question I have that I want to talk about is Black fatigue. And what I mean by that is this struggle that we're getting ourselves ready for. And for those of us who've already been in the struggle, we understand, it at times is a heavy lift, right? And so how do we fight through it? Number one, how do we wrap ourselves around this energy that we're going to need for this next push? And then, is it okay to say no to some fights within our circle of influence? Naima, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah. Well, I have a few points on this. One is, I read this recently and it said, let go. And instead of letting go, we actually need to lean in. We need to lean into ourselves, because I am so tired of the narrative around, and this is what my work is demolishing the strong Black woman syndrome schema. Because that, to me, that's a part of that Black fatigue. That's a part of that the societal, the cultural, and also familial norms that have taken place in our lives as being that strong Black woman, to where we feel like we are holding the weight. We have literally, as Black women, we are the backbone and the pelvis of America. We are the first, we as Black women, we were the ones to birth you, and we are the ones to see you pass on, right? So how are we as Black women taking care of ourselves and not leaning into that narrative saying, you know, angry just because we have feelings, right? So how are we leaning into ourselves saying, you know what, it's okay to feel, and it's okay to say that I'm going to make me a priority. And if that means setting some things aside, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to make me my responsibility, meaning I'm going to make taking care of myself my responsibility. So when I talk about Black fatigue, it's shifting that narrative and not having the guilt behind it. Because again, in the Black community, and especially as Black women, we're used to holding that narrative of being that caretaker, to where when we say selfish, it's like, oh shoot, I can't be selfish, right? But no, this is a time where not only, you know, collectively are we coming together, but also individually, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, of our health, of our wellness, and making that a top priority.
Dr. McGee?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I write for children, and there's a reason. Because I do believe in passing my purse to that young person. If my purse is too heavy, they can hold it. And I use that really as an analogy that we are so used to making ourselves the priority, feeling like there's no one else out there that can share our burdens or help lift the heavy loads. Mm-hmm. And I start with the young people. I start with having them around me to see what I do, so that they know that my day-to-day activities, it's not all that. And there's so much room in it for them to share in. And we have to start building a culture through our children that will help annihilate that mindset. I listen to single women and they wear it like a badge. Well, you know, I'm a single mother. What does that really mean? I mean, are you asking for sympathy? I mean, what does that really mean? And to so many people, it means different things. It means like, I got this, you don't need to tell me, I've been doing this, I don't need nobody to help me. And so in my world, I have to write books that support our babies, that let them know that they're going to be the future leaders, to let them know that chivalry is not dead. You know, I too often, I mean, we open the door for ourselves. We won't even let nobody open the door for us. And you train that. You know, women that have male sons, they opening the door for them. So we have to kind of change that mindset, and we have to bring young people along the journey so that they understand. I did the marathon for 10 years, and I had my husband bring them to those spots that I was walking. So afterwards, we went through it, and they were like, Mom, you walked that far? I'm like, yeah, it took me 10 hours, but I did it. And so you have to find ways to be okay with training and teaching. I'm going back to a point that Michelle made, and that's we can't just have these little micro DI programs. Who's that going to benefit? Somebody gonna get paid, and the person on the so-called receiving end has not learned anything. But like she said, check a box. Well, we need to check a box with our physical behavior, because so much of what we do in this 21st century, it's based on what we allow and what we haven't allowed. I don't open doors for myself if I don't have to. I'll just stand there. because even with the babies, they know better. So in order for us to do better, we need to start having this conversation at 18 months.
Right.
You know, because if we don't, you're going to get a lazy group of people and you're going to keep putting the burden of all of this on yourself. I took a young lady with me to the Black Caucus. She had never been, but trust me, had we not had this pandemic, she would have been there this year. I took a young lady with me to Bloody Sunday. They can't just read about this and we expect them to understand and want to relieve us of some of the things that we know that we've experienced. They have the experience for themselves. She was able to meet John Lewis last year. That man's not here this year, but trust me, it's gonna make my burden a lot lighter because she's willing to pick up that mantle and keep some of the things that, you know, I'm just inundated with. And so I think that, yes, self-care is important, but I think we need to start allowing ourselves to share where we know that we need to be supported. And that to me is in all aspects of what we're doing. And we cannot be that selfish.
Beautiful word. That's a beautiful word. Dr. Turner, before you go, I'll testify to that. The work that I'm doing now is because of the United Negro College Fund, when my sister was taken under the wing of Dr. McGee here, and all of the volunteer work that we did back in those days are literally part of my DNA now, because you took the time and it leaned into what I'm doing as in Black Alumni Association. You know, as a young 17, 16, 17-year-old going to those events with Magic and all those individuals, it just really impacted me on that spirit of giving. 100% leaning into that. As a great point that you brought up. Dr. Turner.
I love everything that has been said, and I'll only add to it this way. You know, being a mother of two 30-ish-year-old male sons, I think about this issue a lot. You know, the fatigue issue is something that, you know, many of us feel even more amplified because our young people are getting information in different ways that looks real, you know, in using the many forms of technology, web, movies, all of these things that are allowing many of them to forego their foundations in our history and to believe what's being put in front of them as real. And so, you know, I think it's very important that we stay in this fight, because our history has not been set in concrete. To Naima's point, you know, it's not taught. It's not taught within the realm of American history yet. And so each of us in our own little ways, you know, find so many times during a day where we're trying to personally fill in these gaps and make sure our young people know what their real history is. And we keep trying to run in to do this so that we can give them the foundation that we know that they need. You know, so there's this part of the work in the village. But the other part, you know, to Carlos's point, is how we're raising our children in the first place, you know. And I think that so much work still has to be put into how we give our young people their value. You know, we are their first teachers as parents, and any Black role model that they see, you know, in their walk. But as first teachers, we need to make sure that we are affirming our young people so that they're not, you know, out there on their phones through influencers trying to get their value from other people. Because what people are doing is they are rewriting our history and they are rewriting our value. And I think that this is a critical thing for us to put our arms around. You know, how do we affirm our future and our narratives? Because a lot of this work with diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, I'll go back to that. How many times do they come and ask us first, what should it look like? What do you want? They don't ask. but they go to other pieces of, secondary information and try to fit these agendas together, but yet they've never asked us. And so I think that the fatigue part needs to sit in terms of, continuing to affirm our young and give them the right foundation, but for us to make sure that when our voices are heard, that we are not just telling our stories, but making sure that we are articulating that we have to be aligned with whatever these new policies and agendas are going to be, because it's what we need, and that's the hard part that I'm seeing in a lot of these conversations. A lot of these great ideas, but you didn't ask me, so I would love to see that piece happen. And that's the part that is so fatiguing, trying to get that voice so that our needs are aligned, in this work. So, and it's tiring. That's when I get tired.
Yes. And I love the point, Dr. McGee, is bringing your village to the fight, and really teaching those that are below, beneath, I don't want to say beneath, that are younger than us, that are learning how to, and that was one of my questions, learning how to activate, and you guys answered that beautifully on really mentorship, teaching them, this is a work of love. I mean, this is literally a work of love. It's no other word that I can think of, that it's an unconditional love, agape, since we're here in the church building, that agape love, unconditional, where you've got to do it in spite of what happens to you. You still got to love. And that's what brings your energy to the fight for me, is that love. And that was taught to me by my mother, my father, is that you've got to love unconditionally. You love the person, not the activities or what they do, and figure out a way to help activate and hopefully change that person's value system through hopefully the way that you treat them, and the messages that you bring. And that brings me to the next question about power. We touched a little bit on it, but I really want to focus on what power do we have as a people in this social justice movement? What power do we have now that we aren't using effectively? And that could be personally or societally, that we aren't really using, that we haven't really tapped into the full potential of that power yet. Let's start with Naima, then we'll go to Dr. Turner, and then Dr. McGee.
Thank you. I love this question. I don't feel like we're tapping into our power of collaboration and cooperative economics. We, as just African-American women, we take up the market in reference to consumerism, right? So why are we not having conversations like this? Like, for me, I love more conversations like this in this space, where we're able to come together, where we're literally able to create masterminds and think tanks and say, you know what, you have these skills, I have these skills, let's come together and create something. And that's where I feel like the gap is us coming together in collaboration with our skill sets and building. Because the fact is, we are more resourceful than what we think. We have the resources that we need. We just need to come together strategically and use them.
Great. Dr. Turner?
I think that, I was just looking to see if I was muted. I think Naima is exactly right, the collaborative power. I think we're in this amazing moment in time where we can do things because, we intentionally create critical mass behind our belief systems and our values, enough to create a larger voice. And that is something that, I believe is so valuable right now. For instance, I'll give you a great example. We talk about this even in our board meetings. It's not just enough, let's say, for the USC Black Alumni Association to think a particular thing in an institution that has such a fragile representation of Black students, Black faculty, Black staff. But it would be more powerful if we joined, because we have some shared needs across other systems with other Black alumni associations, you know, because we know we all want the same things. But the bigger the voice, then people do have to pay attention, because we do have the opportunity to stand down from what our commitments to these institutions might be, whether they're financial, you know, whether they are service oriented, but we do have economic power. We do have demographic power if we just collaboratively use it better. And so, you know, I know, honestly, in speaking to a lot of our younger people, that's one of the reasons why they're not just looking for like the leader. You know, it makes a difference that they can create these collectives now, because they understand, you know, that there is a power in amplifying a voice in tremendous numbers. And that's something I'm trying to learn more about, me personally.
Dr. McGee?
Well, Chris, first off, if you were doing student training under me, today you would probably get a C-.
Uh-oh. Oh,
You
Lord.
cannot allow your guests to go last every time. Okay? When we talk about shared equity, let's start there.
I thought you went first the last time. I'm sorry.
No, you need to be writing that down, because if I was in the classroom, my baby's would have said, she went first the first time.
You will go first the next question, Carla.
That's one of the things you're going to have to be very strategic about. I use that as an example, being somewhat facetious, but it's the truth. Right, girls? Right. But when we have to learn what power looks like. And you have to start in increments sometimes. I was going to this Mexican restaurant, and two of my students wanted jobs. So I said, well, where have you guys applied? And they said, well, we went there and they said they only hired their families. I said, really? Okay. I can see that. But just let them know that your family ain't coming. Because most of the people that patronize that restaurant are African Americans. And I just wanted them to sit out for 2 days and see who actually goes into that restaurant. Because the one thing about Black people, we are inclusive. We don't really have a racial agenda when it comes to affecting our capital. So we're gonna hire you, we're gonna train you. And so you have to look at what's the equity? And not just in that situation, but when you're spending your money and they don't respect you, why are you still going there? I can't go someplace and they're gonna complain. I just can't do it. If I go and I try and affect change, because in this country, it's all about the Benjamins. And we have to teach our children their worth. And sometimes we can do it in a very creative way. But again, it needs to start early. Don't wait till they get 18 or 19 years old and they only get to take a foreign language in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, but we allow other children that come here not speaking the language of their university or their school, and they got ESL programs. That's why I started an SLL program, because I can't wait on them to affect where I need to be. And we need to be more proactive in those things that we want more inclusion in. And I love the idea that there are so many other collaborative partners that we could be partnering with so that it makes our situation stronger. And, you know, I should have had on my Black Lives Matter t-shirt, because unapologetically, we got to get there.
That's right.
We got to stop making excuses and say no.
That's right.
We know all lives matter, but that ain't what we're talking about today.
That's right.
And until there is a more inclusive and equitable agenda, we just talking about Black Lives Matter. And we've got to find we've got to connect, you know, we've got to find those individuals that are supportive, and we need to find those individuals that need more education about what it is that we're really asking for.
So I'm gonna follow up to that question because you guys brought up something that kind of all of you are in this space, the space of telling our story and the power of telling our story. Talk a little bit about that, Carlos, Dr. McGee, the power of telling our story. Is there any benefit to that? You know, that's almost a rhetorical question.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you called on me first. And again, I say that facetiously, but you have to think about what that looks like in a larger community. You know, no one wants to be last. No one wants to be, you know, called to the party after all the food is gone. And when I think about telling our story, we first have to learn what our story is so we can stop making up stuff. You know, we are delusional when it comes to certain things. I mean, even our music. I was singing a song, and I, like you, Michelle, I have a 30-year-old and almost a 40-year-old. And they were like, oh, I didn't know you knew Mary J. Blige song. I'm like, first of all, that ain't Mary J. Blige song, okay? Aretha Franklin sung that song way before Mary J. Blige was even born. The Nipsey Hussles, I applaud them. But honey, there have been so many Nipsey Hussles to get him to that platform. And so we've got to start looking at what they're familiar with and bringing the stories that we know to be historically sound. And it takes reading. And so for those of us that can read, we need to read. And we need to read and read and read. And we need to create historical vibe magazines. You know, just put a little article in there about how fabulous we are. We need to have something in periodicals that our children will read. And they're not, you know, they don't read for a long time, you know, so it can't be that long. But it doesn't take that long to start peeling off our history. So for instance, at USC, talk to you about that offline, Michelle, but there should always be something in there, whether it's your newsletter, that we don't know, but that is empowering. I go to a board meeting, I'm going to talk about something every time that board meeting ends. I want to give a shout out to my sorority sisters that are out there on the ground helping Chris today. That's a powerful network. So a shout out to all the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, because you can use that platform to get lots of stories out. I've written 2 books on 2 of the Divine 9, and that's to let young people know that these sororities and fraternities are not all about hazing and stepping, and the legacy is so much more powerful. And so to diffuse that, we've got to find ways to get our stories out and to legitimize our history, because most people, they don't even believe we came from kings and queens. You know, right. They think, I mean, they just don't even believe that, but it's the truth. And we have got to be the truth makers. So thank you, Chris, for letting me go first.
Thank you for going first. Dr. Turner, our stories, another writer on the call here. I mean, our personal stories too. You know, kind of what your book is about. Tell us the power of that, even towards you in writing, you know, your own personal history.
Yeah, thank you. I think that in the telling of our stories, it's a very sometimes it's a painful journey. It's a very freeing journey, but I mean, you know, done with the motivation to teach. And so, for instance, in the book that I wrote it because there's something about this issue of social justice that I know because I've watched it all my life. And what I came to know is that it is really a matter of will. And when it really gets down to it, in terms of the decisions that people make to be accepting of each other, call each other family, love each other, these are decisions of will. And I saw it absolutely happen. You know, my story is about the fact that being a biracial mixed race person, it wasn't about me being that. It was about watching my family make these decisions and these acts of will to build family, and not just to build family in the house, but to affirm my brother and myself in our journeys, you know, into growing adults, and how we learned, you know, that there is this thing that goes beyond race and culture, that dives deep down into how you see the humanity of another person, because you want to, you know, and you have to make the decision to do it if you say you want to, you know. And what does that look like? And I wrote about the hypocrisy that is out there in the world of people saying that they want to do it, but how they really aren't brave enough many times, you know, to cross that barrier, and what that was like for both my parents and my grandparents being in the world. And so that was the lesson that I wanted to teach. But I think that across our culture, there are so many of these lessons about self-discovery, about, you know, finding great power in our identities, and what this means now in the 21st century, because that's where we are now in the 21st century. So even though many of the things that limited us, you know, were created certainly, you know, through the basis of slavery, but the ideas of, you know, putting these hierarchies on human value. I mean, why are we carrying these things into the 21st century? Why are we saying that racism still makes sense in the 21st century? And given that we are now 20 years in, you know, are we going to still say and make room for this conversation as a 21st century conversation without thinking bigger about it? And so that's, you know, our storytelling is so important, you know, to constantly challenge this, because of course it doesn't make sense in the 21st century, but we need to put our voices out there again, you know, talking about how we have filtered that, you know, how our journeys have brought us to this place, and our children need to know that we can be very unapologetic about telling these stories. Our grandchildren need to know it, and those other people need to know it. You know, for as much, for instance, as people will say, you know, it's so important, you know, for our children to see more Black teachers. You know, and I, for instance, sent my kids to all Black schooling until they were in 7th grade. I wanted them to see Black teachers, Black parents, you know, that whole thing. But it's good for other people to see us in these professions and know this is who we are, you know, and that's part of our story, knowing, you know, this is why it's good for you to learn from us. So I think there's so much to that question, Chris.
Yes.
But I think that so many people have so many nuggets to put into this pot of our storytelling. It's really important. But we have some amazing writers out there in the world right now that are getting into like the larger press, and people are really taking note, you know, of what they're saying.
So this is how we're going to end it. We're going to end this call with telling our story, in this Zoom with telling our story. Each individual is going to take about a minute and tell us what's the next step for you in this movement. What's the next step? Is there any agenda that you want to, that you're a part of? Any movement that you kind of want to express that you want support with? Take about a minute. We've got 5 minutes, so we'll take a few minutes each. And I will go last. And I'm going to actually have Naima go first, then Dr. McGee, then Dr. Turner, and then myself. All right. So close us out, Naima. What are the next for you personally?
Next steps for me personally is to continue my work within Story Inside You, which is helping and creating space for brilliant Black women to come together and embrace our story and to create that cooperative economics so that we can help each other in wealth building, provide those resources to go to the next level in our actions. And to also do that in the workspace as well with another initiative that my partner and I, we have in effect and will be launching this year, which is Level Up Today, which is holding these companies accountable to their BLM statements to show up and to be the change and to make those changes in their organization, not just with the training, but literally make the commitment.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Dr. McGee?
Well, I think part of my story today is meeting both of you. So thank you again, Chris, for bringing us together. I'm working on doing a Divine Nine series. I think it's important that when we talk about what we've contributed to this country for the last 410 years, you cannot forget about those sororities and those fraternities. We're the only group that once we leave college, we actually go out and work in our communities. And when I thought about John Lewis, who I met several times, and I'm looking at the Keisha Bottoms and now Kamala Harris, our kids can relate to that. And so I want to bring a focus on people that are a part of the Divine Nine and also to bring in the HBCU schools into play. SC has partnered with Howard over the years. And again, that's a collaboration that I can get behind because I do think we need to be seeing more in white institutions, but I do know we find out who we are in these Black HBCU schools. So I'm waiting on any publisher out there. I've submitted just a query to a couple of publishing companies. And if they decide not to publish it, I'm real good with publishing my own work just so that it gets out there. So again, Chris, thank you so much for the opportunity just to be a part of this fire chat today.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Turner?
Thank you, Chris. One of the initiatives that I'm working on has to do with how Black businesses scale. Now that everyone is saying that they want to help the Black economy, you know, what should that look like? And having been in business for, you know, almost 25 years and having had the fortune now to create a legacy business, there are certain things that really do need to be in place, you know, to allow Black businesses to think bigger and to ideate and to design their infrastructures to go to the next level. So that really is a space that I'm very, very interested in. And one of the things that I'm looking at doing is how to bring in, you know, many partnerships across the spectrum, Black, to put in front of this work. And frankly, being able to use the engine of USC to do that so that it starts to face, you know, in the direction of the Black community in a way that it has not before. Absolutely using our unapologetic channel of the Black Alumni Association and in being able to do that. So that's the personal and business piece of it. And then just helping some of our young Black entrepreneurs, you know, just fly. That's always been interesting to me. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for us over here, you know, obviously here being at the church, the Southside Church of Christ, where we're pushing towards is using our space for more community activities. You know, being a anchor in the community like we have been, but just taking it to the next level. We already have been doing a lot of food programs, et cetera, but we're creating more and more partnerships with Kaiser, Verizon, AT&T to do some of these things that we're talking about. The next big push is our Digital Bites initiative, which is a digital, taking a bite out of the digital divide. And what we're doing with that is we're purchasing devices, and we're looking at doing hotspots. We're also looking at sponsoring people to get retrained, those who have been laid off to be retrained into the digital world. We're looking at some Google certificates. We actually are creating hopefully a relationship to sponsor several people to go back to community college and get cloud certificates, cloud computing certificates, cybersecurity certificates, to get them into a new workforce as quickly as possible. And so ccciinvolved.org is where you can go to look up that Digital Bites initiative that we're pushing forward this next week. We literally have already got about 70 or 80 people who've applied for devices. And we have 70 or 80 laptops to give out next week. So I'm really happy that we've got our sponsors, Verizon and AT&T, on board for that. And we're looking for more people to help donate towards that movement. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to just give a shout out to the idea that came from our community here, and the resources that we're trying to galvanize together, as you guys talked about, to help make change in this digital divide. I want to thank all of you, the three of you, for taking a Saturday off to spend an hour with us to kind of just support this conversation. And I'm really privileged to be on this call with so many people who are doing wonderful things. You know, the conversations with the lead to action is what we were talking about. And the fact that we invited you, we knew that you were already in action. So there was a purpose behind that, and hopefully to inspire some other people to get from behind the conversations and right into some action-oriented things, even as an individual. It doesn't take 17 people, but if you have an idea, bring it to someone else and get collaborative with it, get it out there. The things that we start can ignite and push people to the next level. So don't hesitate to get involved in the work. Thank you, Dr. Turner. Thank you, Dr. McGee. Thank you, Naima. Appreciate you so much. And to those who will listen to this recording, get to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.